Now, on top of all that, we want to look at things like, what are they doing? How are they spending their time? So now we're seeing this, the newest phase now is an explosion of iPad programs designed to keep the kid quiet. But in fact, I don't know if I'll have time to do that this morning or not. These are physiological stressors in their own right. If taken to excess, they are, they disrupt that homeostatic mechanism. You know what, maybe I'll explain it if I get a chance in about 20 minutes. It's interesting, and it's the kind of thing I would have thought has absolutely no relevance for early educators. Well, things are changing pretty fast. So you're getting 5-year-olds that are spending all of their time playing Minecraft and none of their time running around. And they need to run around too, because that's one of the restorative mechanisms. Climbing a tree, playing outside, unstructured playtime. Even, I'll give you a fascinating example. People don't know about this, and I don't know why we haven't explained it to educators. There has been an enormous amount of research done in medicine on the effects of nature as a restorative calming mechanism. So they did this one classic experiment where they took a whole slew of people that had had hernia operations, and they put half of them in rooms where the window looked at a brick wall, and the other half looked outside at trees. And the ones that looked outside at trees had twice as fast recovery and almost no pain medication. This is a major finding in medicine, and we have, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, the woman to read is Esther Greenberg, or go online and look at the Waveney Center in Connecticut, which is designed around nature to speed up recovery. One of the things that we've been doing in some of the Canadian schools that were some of the worst is basically getting communities involved in bringing nature back into the school life. And if you want to see what can be done, it's not worth hooking up my computer for this, but look at Barrowtown in British Columbia. Barrowtown's in Abbotsford. And this looked like a concentration camp. It looked like a scene from Stalag 17. And what they did was they went around the community and said, this is our vision. They got an architect to donate his time to create outdoor learning spaces. And then they went around the community. Who can drive a bulldozer? Who can drive a digger? Is there anybody here? They got one of the parents who owned a nursery. She donated mulch. And it became the community's school, and it's gorgeous. And the transformation on student behavior was that essentially a school that had been plagued with suspensions, it became a thing of the past. And now what the teachers can do is they take the kids outside. The kids all have different parts of a vegetable garden that they tend. So it's a clever way, not just of building, not just of bringing self-regulation into design principles. And we can do this inside the school too. I can give you lots and lots of examples of how you can do it in a school or in an early caregiving environment. But it's also a way of building those kinds of ties between community and school. All right. So all I'm trying to do here is show you how the word stress is it's a much more subtle concept than it gets treated in the press. You know, I saw the National Post had this article attacking me, saying, you know, well, what does he think that every kid has a daytimer? I think that was their line. But that's not what we were saying. What we were trying to explain is that there are lots of different kinds of stresses that children are dealing with today, and it's showing up in their behavior or in their ability to learn, et cetera, or in their mood. Okay, so I have to somehow take all this and show how you guys have a pivotal role to play in helping children learn how to manage this on their own. That's the key to self-regulation. Self-regulation is about self-regulation. It's about children mastering certain basic skills. Can they master this? Can your kids master this? Yes. What we proved in we ran a $10 million study at York to show this. We did it with autistic kids because they have the hardest problem. They have the most stresses of any of the populations we work with. And what we showed was they can master this by the age of 5, and they begin to master it by the age of 3. And these are low-functioning kids. So if a low-functioning child with autism can do it, any kid can do it, and they can. They get it very quickly once you know what the 5 key steps are. So we're heading towards the 5 key steps. So what I wanted to explain to you, I have to do one more bit of science if that's okay. Why we do this, and that's the answer. The field I work in is called Developmental Neuroscience. So we look at basically how brains develop. And you all know, by the way, Clara, where I'm right to focus on 0 to 5, right? Okay. And you all know that the brain is going through this massive developmental process in your age group. In fact, every single child, every human baby is born premature. It's the defining feature of our species. It's not just the kid who's born at 36 weeks who's premature. They're all premature. It's a complicated reason why we say this. The technical term for it is something called secondary altriciality. And what it means is that around 3 million years ago, there's been a series of humans. We're the last of a long line of earlier human species. Around 3 million years ago, nature made 2 very interesting discoveries. The first one was that walking upright was an advantage over all the other species. Nature loved the fact that we could be bipedal. The other thing that she discovered was that a big brain compensated for the fact that we're not very strong, we're not very fast. So we began to dominate other species simply because our brains were growing and we were walking upright. By walking upright, it frees your hands and you can use your hands for throwing spears or collecting or making tools. But nature had a problem. And the problem was there's only so big a brain you can have in a newborn and allow your females to continue to walk upright. So nature decided 3 million years ago, this is it. This is as big a brain as a female can give birth to and still remain bipedal. I once gave this lecture with Fraser in front of 5,000 K teachers explaining this. And I had this voice at the back yell, "Nature went too far." So everybody laughed. So I made the mistake of saying, I said, she's standing at the back, she's standing up. So I said, "What do you mean?" And she says, "Have you never heard of an episiotomy?" But the reason why we say this is because the size of the female cervix has not changed in 3 million years. So we have these bones that we can compare. We can compare the pelvic width. And what happened was, having said that, we know that with each new generation of humans, each new species of humans, the adult brain got bigger. So our brain today is 4 to 5 times as big an adult brain as theirs was. Our brains just got bigger and bigger and bigger, but the newborn brain didn't change. So what that means is that all of the brain growth, or a large part of the brain growth, occurs after birth. It's postnatal brain growth. Our brains explode. A baby's brain explodes the moment they're born. 700 new synapses form every single second. So it's this incredible explosion of brain growth, and it will continue until the child is 6.5 years old. At the moment of birth, the child only has around between 20 and 25% of their adult brain. By the time they're 6.5, they will have 95%. So you've got this extraordinary, it's unlike any other species, and it enables us to adapt to any kind of environment because our brains are so primitive, so unstructured, it's called plastic. They're very adaptable. Okay. For neuroscientists, it raised 3 fundamental questions. And the 3 fundamental questions are, 1, what's in this newborn brain? So I've got this primitive, what is in effect a fetus outside the womb for somewhere between the first 6 to 9 months of its life. Totally helpless, totally dependent on its caregiver. The caregiver is performing, this is important. And you have to explain this to your parents. I was just at a resort last week with my children, and there was a family at the resort, and they had a 3-week-old baby at the resort, and it was making me crazy because a 3-week-old baby should not be exposed to other crowds, should not be taken into the swimming pool with chlorine, and so on and so on. It's still a fetus. And what we need to do is create womb-like conditions for that baby. And I'll show you why in like 5 minutes. We need to create womb-like conditions for that baby for the first year. They need to understand this. They need to understand that the greatest threat to a child 0 to 5 is being scared. Yes? She just whispered to me, which is where I'm going, fight or flight. No, that's fine. It's good because you said it, it triggered it. And that is the biggest thing that we're looking at this morning. Why we are seeing a generation of kids that are going into fight or flight and what we do about it. I'll explain fight or flight too when I get to it. So we work very hard explaining to parents how we need, your baby's basically transitioning from one womb to another womb. I said to one parent, I'm putting this in the new book, that I told these parents they had to create a living womb for their kid. I thought it was clever. But, and for this child, this was a child, it was a very interesting case. This was a little girl, I'll tell you the case since I'm doing all right. It's a very interesting case. So they called me because their kid was only sleeping around 4 to 6 hours a day. So, we want to see that baby. And this was, she was, I've forgotten now, she was young, like 7, 8 months, somewhere in there. And we want to see them sleeping 15 hours a day. And so they couldn't get her down, and they couldn't get her to stay asleep. And because they had a young baby, they lived out in a busy part of Toronto, out in the Queen West. And I agreed to meet them at a bistro that was across the road from their condo so that they didn't have to travel into town. So you can imagine my shock. It was a very crowded bistro. When the parents come in carrying the baby in a baby carrier. This is a baby that's having a lot of sleep problems. So mom says, so I said something, I can't remember what. Mom says, well, this is the only place that we can get her to sleep. And sure enough, the baby was zoned right out. She's in a deep sleep. But the thing is that if you overstress a child, a baby, their ultimate resource after they've had their tantrum is to fall asleep. Sleeping is the ultimate stress reaction. And in fact, what they thought was the baby being lulled to sleep was a baby that was already overstressed and was just tipped over into her ultimate defense mechanism. But it's a much more complicated story than just saying, well, they were stupid parents whose baby should have been left at home. In fact, this was a baby that was very, very sensitive. She had been born, because these brains are so primitive, she had been born with all kinds of hypersensitivities. So the SLPs here know exactly what I'm talking about, and they can have a workshop on this and explain hyper and hyposensitivities to you, or your psychologist. And when I went into the apartment, we had to do a complete makeover on the apartment. So to give you some examples, they were news junkies, and they both worked at home, and they had CNN all the time. But the problem with CNN is that they're constantly trying to generate news, so no matter what the story is, Wolf Blitzer's having a breakdown. So, and the volume goes up, and he's shouting, oh my God, it's raining in Oklahoma. So we had to get them to turn off the TV. They used a pine scent, because they like to camp, they used a pine scent to remind them of camping, but this was a child that had hyper olfactory senses. We had to get rid of the scent. So remember where I started talking about stress? So for this child, the smell was a stressor. The noise of the TV was a stressor. The crowds of the bistro were stressors. There was all kinds of stressors. And in order to, what they needed to do to get this child to sleep was not sleep training. Because that was a further stressor, right? So, the kid wakes up and the kid is terrified and the kid starts to cry, and Mom told me, I'll never forget this, she said, I would stand outside her room while she was crying, and I had a stopwatch, and the book said that I had to wait 5 minutes tonight, so I would just stand there before I could rush back into her. So you're stressing out Mom, you're stressing out the kid, and so what we did was we worked very, very carefully, or not me, but one of the clinicians who does this, and reduced all the stress. And eventually, not eventually, within a relatively short time, the child was getting their 15 hours of sleep, naturally, because the stress, the physical stresses had been reduced. Because if that stress is too high, the child goes into fight or flight. And fight or flight looks very different in a baby or in a 3-year-old or in a 5-year-old than it looks in, say, a teenager. Okay, so you sort of see where I'm going. I'm going to show you how it works in 2 seconds. When we look at the brain then, we ask ourselves, the developing brain, 3 basic questions. What's in it? So basic reflexes, basic emotions. What's not in it? That's our big one. What's missing? And then the third question, the stuff that's missing, how does it get put in? Well, the answer to the second question is pretty obvious. What's missing? What's missing is language. They don't know anything about social behavior. They really don't know anything about facial expressions, about gestures. So they got to learn a lot of stuff. But the most important thing that's missing is self-regulation. Those systems for dealing with stress are not, they have a couple of very primitive reflexes, but they aren't aware of stress. They aren't aware of when they're getting stressed. They have no sense of what they need to do to calm themselves down so that they don't go into flooded, so that they can sleep. We have to do all of that for them. So the design for nature is that. What nature did, in order for us to have this premature brain that lacks self-regulation, nature's design was to hook up a higher order brain that has it to a lower order brain that doesn't. She or he is the one that regulates. She or he is the one who reads the signs of when my child is starting to become overstressed and calms them down so that they don't go into flood. Or she or he is the one that reads the signs of when I need to raise him or raise the baby up, upregulate them. Why would you ever upregulate a baby? That's a question. Why do you need to upregulate a baby? When and why? Not you again. I know you know the answer. When or why do you need to upregulate a baby? A lot of you have had kids. Yeah. Go ahead. This is a problem. No, seriously, this is a big problem. Look, we do a lot of work. I have to be careful on how I answer this because I got my supers sitting right beside me. I work with the supers around the country. Nobody knows the stress that they're under from every direction. But we do work with, we do a lot of work now with the heads of, I was telling Mike this morning, so I don't want to repeat what I said, but we do a lot of work with the heads of teachers' unions. And the first question we always ask them is, what's your biggest demand? And their biggest demand is not money. Never once have I said someone tell me what our members want is more money. What they want is they want time. That's their number one demand. I need time, so they want to have time to learn self-reg. Self-reg is a complicated thing. The stuff I'm doing this morning is just a taste. To learn how to do it takes a while, so it becomes natural. But the other thing is that it is a problem. Classroom size is a problem. And so, we get the answer that, this is a serious, we're in a serious financial risk. I don't want to talk about the politics of it. But as part of the paradigm revolution, we have to, as a society, engage in a serious dialogue about what are we trying to accomplish with universal education. As a nation, Canadians are committed to universal education. If this is a value, then we have to talk about this, all of us, not simplistic campaign promises that didn't get delivered. But instead, we need mom and dad, we need, and we have, I heard there was some of our trustees here. Trust me, your trustees are spearheading this dialogue. This is a much bigger issue about what is the importance, what are we trying to accomplish with universal education, what can we do better? So there are so many aspects of this. My job is real simple. I just get to talk about the science. But I can tell you that your question is a serious one and demands a serious conversation. I'll give you another one. All right, let's leave it that. So where was I before I got on a soapbox? Oh yeah, why do you upregulate a kid? Who said that? Okay, so what she said was to learn. Bingo. That's why you upregulate a kid. When do you upregulate a kid? When do you start to upregulate? Yep. Okay, so how do you do it?
Well, most of the time when you think of a young baby,
Yep.
they'll show signs themselves that they're getting excited. They'll wake up, they'll move their legs and everything. So it's a perfect opportunity to introduce toys,
So who would have ever believed that in the year 2015 we would have to be teaching parents this? But we do. And part of the reason is because of the changes in our society, right? So we have so many young families now that aren't living close to mom or grandmom, or maybe they have moms that didn't go through this. So we're seeing the second generation or even the third generation effect. So we have to go back now and we have to teach them about, the reason why the kid never eats isn't because she's not hungry. You have to upregulate them. Even when they're babies, we have to upregulate them to get them to feed, because while they're feeding, they're looking at you, they are learning. They're learning language, they're learning facial expressions. We have to, so we have to upregulate interest, upregulate curiosity, upregulate happiness, pleasure, all that stuff. When do you downregulate? That's easy, so we don't need to do that all the time. But it's an important point when we're talking to our families now that self-regulation is as much about up as down. The systems for doing this aren't in that little brain. A baby cannot naturally know when a baby doesn't, or an infant or a toddler do not know when it's time to up or down regulate. They don't read the signs. They don't know, over and over we have cases, to take the upregulating side, where parents, we've come in and we're now dealing with a 6, 7, 8-year-old who's having anxiety problems, and they'll tell us that, when she was a baby, she really liked to be left alone. So we would leave her alone and she would just lie on her back and she'd be happy and content like that for hours and hours. But for whatever the biology that was going on, this was a baby that needed a little bit more stimulation to upregulate her. She needed help getting into that zone so that what you said can happen, so that the learning can happen. So the basic principle here is, so the caregiver, and that includes you guys, because the baby's brain does not distinguish between mommy or daddy and you as, you're not my mommy and daddy, you're an educator. The baby's brain just sees you as adult brain. And at an adult brain, you have to be performing the same function of up and down regulating. And the basic principle here is that it is by being regulated that the child acquires the capacity to self-regulate. Some children are much harder to regulate than others, either up or down. It could be for social reasons, it could be for biological reasons, it might be a combination for two. But we have this incredible opportunity, 0 to 5, to get them to regulate them, to help them regulate, and to use this as an opportunity to self-regulate.